Alright guys, thanks for coming and joining me again for another tutorial. So in this tutorial we're going to be talking about how to create kind of what we have on the right side here, which is kind of almost, it reminds me of a segmented controller, but where I can kind of move left and right between two different things, and we get that animation going back and forth. You'll notice we have kind of like a linear animation up top, and we got the spring going on the actual, segmented controller piece. Okay, and we're going to talk about what goes into each one of these pieces. So I want to also show you another implementation of it is actually in my recipe app that I'm working on, where I can flip between, say, the ingredients and the steps and the comments that people put on it. So if this is something you might be interested in beta testing, by the way, just shoot me a message or comment below. But if you're interested in beta testing, you can get involved in this. But that's kind of where I use it. That's a good use case of something like this. So if you see it not animating, it's just a matter of, the computer is not really simulating it well. But that's kind of the idea. It's a really nice animation. And before we get started, I kind of just want to show you really quickly how this works. So the best way to show you is actually to put some colors on all the clear things that are working in the background. So what I did is I actually came here and I can replace all of my commented out sections and let it run. And what you'll see is that I have all these spacers that are expanding and shrinking. So when I click on one, different spacers get larger and smaller. And that's what's pushing things left and right. So in the finished product, these spacers are all clear, but in the non-finished product, what we have, you can actually see all these colors coming out, and that shows you how everything is working. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with that. I'm gonna go ahead and re-comment that out. Okay, so the first thing we should do is we should open up a new project, single app view. Okay, I'm gonna call this code tutorial, and then we can almost call this like a segment animations. Okay, and I'm going to put this on my desktop really quick. So code tutorial underscore segment animations. All right, I'm going to create that, and I'm going to start off actually by killing the canvas. I'm not going to use the canvas at all for this entire thing. I'm not a fan of the canvas for the most part. I think it actually takes up way more resources than it's worth. And I'm going to actually kill the canvas over here now that I got the chance to show you what we're making. And let's just look at the code together. So I'm going to zoom in on the code so you can see a little bit better. Okay, so I apologize if some of the code starts to fold over. I just think it's the best way to look at it so you guys can see better. So taking a look at the code, first thing we need to do is we actually need to just create two variables. And these are the only two variables we need for the entire thing. So we're going to go to the beginning here, and I'm going to say, I'm going to create a state variable. Sorry about that. There we go. State var. All right, state var. We'll call this toggled, and it's going to be equal to true. I'm going to create another var. It's going to be called, let's say, button dimensions. Okay, and it's going to be a CG float. It's going to be equal to 50. And now the next thing is I need to create a VStack inside of here. Okay. So inside the VStack, we essentially, if you look at the other finished product, we have one piece on top, okay, which is the ZStack, and that'll contain our controller, and then one piece on bottom. Okay, so these are two items. And the second one is an if statement, but you'll understand why when we get to the end. So what we need to do, and if you're kind of lost when I keep going page by page, I'll keep it really simple for you. If you see where it says code tutorial underscore segment animations, that's the one we're building together. And if you see, say, trial underscore whatever, that's the one I built in advance to kind of get a feel for it. So the one we're working on always says code tutorial in the top left corner. That's how you know you're in sync with me. So in the ZStack, or in the VStack, I'm going to create a ZStack here, okay? And I'm also going to create, let's just say, a text underneath it for now, okay? I'm going to make this say bottom view, just for now. We'll eventually get rid of that. And so now inside the ZStack, what I need to do is I need to put an HStack and another HStack directly underneath it. And what I need to put inside here is a spacer, and you put three spacers actually. Spacer, spacer, and spacer. And then inside of the HStack, we'll leave with the bottom HStack for now. We'll just actually comment it out just for a second while we're building the first one. So if you look at this finished product, it's really a spacer, a button, a spacer, a button, and a spacer. So three spacers and two buttons between them, okay? And the way you can almost think about it is we have a front view which actually contains the buttons, and then behind it we have a circle that's actually just going left and right. Okay, the circle is not actually the button. It's just a view behind it for the sake of aesthetics. The buttons which are on top are moving the circle left and right by flipping a toggle. Okay, so we'll get into how that works in a second. Let's start by putting a button here. Okay, I'm going to drag this one in. And for now, I'll say the first button, when I click on it, we're going to set toggled is equal to true. Self.toggled equals true. Okay, and the second one, actually, let's go ahead and make this say image. We're going to use one of the SF symbols, system name, and let's see the one we used in the other one. We used the text bubble image, okay? So I'm going to copy that one over. That's the image I chose to use. So image, system name, text bubble. Okay, and then I'm going to copy that whole piece right there. And the second button is going to change it to false. And the image we're going to use is right here. It's the list.bullet.below.rectangle. It's really wordy, all right? And what I need to do is I need to give these images a few attributes really quick. I want to make sure that the images have a font size of 25 and a foreground color that depends on whether or not they're selected. Okay, so I'm going to copy that over, and we'll talk about what it says. So what this is saying, remember, this is the one we're working on together. What it's saying is that this image is going to be the type, the SF symbol text bubble. Okay, it's going to have a font with the size of 25, and its foreground color, if toggled, is true. So toggled question mark. This is a ternary operator. So this means if toggled is true, then it's going to be white. And if it's false, it's going to be light gray. Okay? So now I'm going to take that, I'm going to copy it, I'm going to bring it down for rectangle, and I'm just going to flip this to say exclamation toggled, which means not. So it's saying if toggled is not true, or if it's false, then its color is white, which means that one will be white while the other's gray, and the other one's gray while the other one's white. Okay? So that takes care of that. And if I save this and I run this now in the simulator, we should actually see our buttons looking kind of, we should actually, if you think about it, we'll only see one button because one of them is going to be on top of a white background and it's going to have a white font. And if you've been thinking about it, that should be this text bubble. So if you notice, we don't see the text bubble icon because it's white and it's on a white background. Now if I click on this one, they flip. So you can see that it's obviously working, right? So the next piece, so we can take this HStack, fold it up, and that HStack is almost essentially done. So now the second HStack we were working on within the Z stack, we're going to actually put it on top because if it's physically on top in the code, that means it is behind it in the Z plane of the screen. And this is where we start to have a little bit of fun. So if we look at the code that I built in advance, let's look at what it says. So the big thing actually I want to make sure we do is we're going to put spacings of 0. I like it because it guarantees consistency. So that means that between the objects, don't put any spacing unless I tell you to put padding or something very specific like that. Now, looking at what is inside of this Z stack, well, if you think about what we need to make sure that at a bare minimum, so let's look at the simulator again. We need to make sure that at a bare minimum, there is always a spacer on the left and a spacer on the right of that circle when it moves, right? So what that means for us is that in our project, this is the one we're working on, code tutorial, we need to make sure we have at least one spacer on either side, okay? And one of the things that I found is that when you start doing conditional, so when I'm gonna go look at the finished product again, when you start doing ternary operators on width, then you start having a weird priorities with which spacer is more important for getting its maximum, or its width that we prescribe it. And so what instead I've been working with is actually maximum width. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our circle. We're going to start by putting the circle that we want to create. This is the project we're working on. I'm going to put a circle smack dab in the middle between those two spacers. Okay? I'm going to change this to button dimensions. So what yours should have now is the bottom HStack, which you already finished. I'm folding it up because we're not touching it again for at least for a little while. Okay? And then we have this right here where it says circle.frame. Okay? It has a width of button dimensions, a height of button dimensions, and a foreground color of blue. So if I save it and I run it, what I should see is a blue circle that is smack dab in the middle of the screen, but it'll be right behind those two buttons. So as you see, it's right in between the two buttons and it's in the middle of the screen, but it's not moving in any direction, right? So if I were to put a spacer right here, Oh, so actually one more important thing is we actually need to make sure, so this was a crucial little piece, is that bottom H stack, it needs to have a very definite frame. So I'm going to fold that back up and we'll talk about where we're going to put that. So this is the one we built together so far, right? We need to make sure that the button has a finite frame of width, button width, and height, sorry, not button width, button dimensions, which is the variable we chose. So we need to make sure that each button, okay, the text bubble button and the list bullet below rectangle button, they need to have a very definite frame width of button dimensions and height of button dimensions, okay? So I'm going to save that right there, and now I'll fold this up, and it's pretty much done for now, or almost forever. So what we need to do is we need to put, if you think about what this finished product looks like, let's look at this one again. When this bubble is all the way over here, what we're telling it is we need to have at least 2 spacers and the width of this circle pushing it to the left. Because if you think about what determines the position of this icon right here, well, it has 1 spacer pushing against 1 spacer, 2 spacer, plus at least the width of this icon, right? So what that means is we need to look at like the finished code. On either side of the circle, we need to make sure we have at least 3 spacers, okay? So I'm going to copy it over, and we'll look at what each one should look like. So on top of the circle, we should see a spacer with a height of 30 and a max width of dot infinity, okay? And that one will never change. Okay, I'm going to change this to button dimensions so it matches what we have. And so what this is saying is, no matter what, this guy is going to have a maximum width of infinity. It doesn't matter whether toggled is on or off. It doesn't matter. Then the one underneath it is saying, all right, if toggled is on, then I want this view to have a size priority of width of button dimensions. And if you look at the finished product, that makes sense because we need at least 1 spacer plus the width of button dimensions. And then we have another spacer that can occupy up to infinity if given the opportunity, which is this one right here. And then we have our circle, and then we have the spacer again. Does that make sense? So this, what you're looking at, effectively, is this orientation. Now, when I flip and I click this one, all of these ones right here need to actually be flipped back to off, okay? So, or essentially a max width of 0, okay? And what that does is that forces everything to come back on this side, because what we're about to do is we're about to take this exact same code and we're going to put it on the other side now. Okay, and this next part, this order doesn't necessarily matter, what I just toggled, what I flipped right there. But what you'll see is that now on this side we have the same exact thing, but it needs to say if toggled is equal to false or if not toggled. Does that make sense? So if I save it and I run it, it might not be animated, but everything should at least move to its proper place. So now if I click here, oh, we actually do have a bit of an issue. So let's figure out what that issue is. It's actually right here because we didn't put this dot frame max width infinity. So it didn't understand its priority. So I need to save it and run it again. And I might as well actually give this thing a height of 30. The height of 30 is actually for the sake of debugging, if I want to give it a background color of a color. So we're almost there. It seems to be missing just one crucial little piece. So if we look at it, let's take a look and see why it's doing that. If we look down here, what we'll notice is we didn't put dot frame button dimensions. We didn't put that on the second button as well. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to put that down here on the second button. It needs to have a width of button dimensions as well. And that should put everything exactly where it needed to go. So now if we look at the code or the product, boom, everything is going to its proper place. The only difference now is that nothing is being animated, okay? So everything is going exactly where we want it. The next thing we need to do is we need to set up some animations. So I'm going to fold up that H stack, both H stacks for that matter, okay? And let's look at the code that we had from earlier. So all I need to do for these is I actually just need to give them an animation, okay? And I'm gonna copy this one over because this one actually I kind of fine-tuned it to make it look really nice. So this animation, I'm gonna put it on the entire Z stack. And what it's saying is I want the animation to be of a type an interpolating string with a stiffness of 330, a damping of 20, and an initial velocity of 7. So this kind of determines its speed. This one determines its kind of like recoil, and this one also has a factor in how much it recoils. So if I save it and I run it, that circle should be moving left to right, and we should see a transition as the color changes between the two buttons. So now we already have that thing moving left to right with the transition. We're getting there. We just have one last piece to get to our final product. Because if you remember, our goal was to make it look like this, where when we go left and right, this bottom thing moves left and right as well. It needs to match. So for that next piece, we're going to get rid of bottom view here. And instead, I'm just going to say if toggled, do something, and else do something else. So I'll say if toggled, I want you to put a rectangle, and I want it to have a padding, actually not just any rectangle, I want it to be a rounded rectangle. I think it's just cleaner for the sake of demo. And that rounded rectangle is going to have a corner radius of, let's say, 15. Let's say it has a padding, just standard padding. And let's just lastly say it has a foreground color of dot red. Okay, and I can put this one here, and I can say foreground color of dot blue. Maybe even get in a slightly, make it slightly less opaque. So that way it just kind of looks softer on the eyes. It doesn't really matter for anything other than just us looking at it. But if I save it and I run it now, we'll see that clicking the buttons will actually flip the view that we're looking at. So we can flip between two different views, right? But it's not kind of like transitioning in and out. And so transitioning now, that is the last piece of the puzzle. So if we look at the transitions that we need, we're actually going to be using something called an asymmetric transition, okay? So let's take a look at what that looks like. So we're going to say that the transition for the rounded rectangle, and we're going to say it's going to be in any transition dot asymmetric, and we're going to say the insertion is going to be dot move. We'll say dot leading. So move the leading edge, and its removal is going to be dot move dot trailing. And all we're going to say is that the animation for that should be roughly let's do linear with a duration of 0.4. Okay, so the only thing I need to do now is I can take that entire transition, I can copy it over here into the top rounded rectangle, and I need to just flip trailing and leading so that way they each come from a different side. So I save it and I run it, and everything should move properly. Actually, we missed one little piece, the one crucial little piece. We need to take animation and actually bring it outside of the transition piece right here. So this whole section was animation, right? Sorry, I lost my scope there. So it needs to be outside of the transition. So I need to take that entire piece, fold up the transition to make sure I'm not inside of it, and then put the animation. And that's just kind of something I've found is the way to make it work from experience. So there you have it. So now they move left and right, just like we'd wanted. And if anything, you might just want to make it like an ease in out. Actually, even better, you could use the exact same animation that we had up here. I didn't do this in my ahead of time, so let's go ahead and just take a look at how it looks. I think it would even be more coherent. If I save it and I run it, we might actually find that it looks even nicer. But we'll find out. There you go. Yeah, actually, that's so much cleaner. If anything, you could even make it trail behind a little bit by making this a 6. Or you know what, we'll make this one an initial velocity of 6 and make this one maybe like a 5.4, something like 10% less or so. So we look at it now. And so the top one is just a little bit faster. Or sorry, I messed that up. What I meant to say is this one here could be, we can make this one, we can keep it at maybe 6. Maybe keep this initial velocity. Let's try 6 and 3.5. Sorry, that was silly of me. So save and run it. Let's see what happens. So you almost feel like one might trail, but it's not trailing. It almost seems like it's adopting this faster speed. And I'm not entirely sure why, to be honest with you. If you have any input, please feel free to put it in the comments. But the point is that we made our end product. So now when I can click here, I can kind of go back and forth, and we have that circle view moving left and right. So I just want to reiterate, I think one of the biggest things that you can use is using colors to guide you along the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this one, my finished product, one more time. And the reason I'm going to run it is because I think it's a really good way to visualize what's actually happening in the background here. So just to realize that we have views in the background. That circle that's moving left and right is not actually the button. It's just something for the sake of aesthetics. So that's why putting these views is pretty powerful. That's why we have this frame height of 30. It lets me flip the colors on and off, and I get to see it. If you don't have that, the spacer is assumed to have a height of 0, and you can't actually see it working left and right. So you give it a height to make sure that it understands it's a full box. All right, so that's kind of our finished product. If you're trying to figure out how to put things inside of here now, kind of like how I had done it over here. If you're trying to figure out how to put actual things in here, well, if you think about it, rectangle is just a view. So you can put any view you want inside of here, okay? So that is the finished product, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks, guys.